Hey there, my name is Chris Acton with Acton Creative, and this is a Handwoven Experience, episode 103. And in this episode, well, you and we're gonna have the talk. The take-up talk. Hopefully it won't be nearly as uncomfortable as other talks. So you may have heard the phrase, you need to allow for take-up. And especially if you're just beginning, you may be thinking, what is take-up and how do I allow for it? Well, take-up is the loss of distance in the warp yarns created by the weft yarns. Oh, let's untangle that real quick because that sounds very confusing. So when you are laying out your project, you have dressed your loom and all of your warp yarns are nice and straight, right? Now, the moment you start to add a weft yarn, that weft yarn is going to push your warp yarn up and down to accommodate the space by the weft yarn. Okay, so let me show you a little visual which might help. So let's say this guy right here, boy, you can hardly see it. This little guy is our weft. Well, my warp yarn is going to stay pretty straight because it's not going to need to allow a lot of space for this weft. How about this one? Look at this nice chunky thing. If this is our weft, which is in our shuttle, every time I throw the shuttle, then the warp yarn is going to be pushed up and down because of the space of this yarn. That's take-up. It is how much space we're losing because of the size of the weft. All right, look at this one. This little nugget is some rep weave, which I love rep weave. But rep weave is distinctive because it has a very chunky weft to it. So if we look at it from the side, if these are our warp yarns going this direction, every time I include a weft, it has to go up and down a long ways to accommodate that nice big chunky weft that makes the ridges in the fabric. So when they say you need to allow for take-up, they mean you need to allow inches. You need to allow more distance in your warp because of the size of the weft. Now, you may be thinking, okay, I get it in theory. What does that mean in real life? My personal kind of approach to this is I add 1 inch per every foot of warp. So when I have 12 inches of warp, I add 1 more inch to accommodate my take-up. Let's say that you want to do a project and the finished size is 120 inches. It is 10 feet. Well, when I am planning for the length of my warp, I'm going to add 10 inches. So it's 130 inches to make sure that when all's said and done, that my project still has 120 inches of warp because my little warp yarn is going to go up and down the entire time. So this really works well with wefts that aren't particularly huge. Like for both of these, I would use that kind of formula. However, if you are doing something that has a really fat weft, like rep weave, add more than that. You could even just double it. You could say, I'm gonna add 2 inches per foot for the project, just to make sure that you have enough length in your warp at the end of the day. And as you're listening to all this, you may be thinking, how is this different from, say, shrinkage? Well, shrinkage refers to something that you address after it comes off the loom. When it's going through the washer, the dryer, however you're going to finish the project, that's when shrinkage comes into play, when everything is contracting and getting closer to each other. Take-up is a distinctly on the loom issue. This is when you're going to talk about take-up, is when you're at the loom thinking about the actual process of weaving. I hope that all made sense. You can always drop me a note in the comments to ask for clarification or if you have any questions about take-up, because once you get the hang of it, it's no problem. And it'll just become kind of innate as you plan your projects. I would recommend that you use my formula if you haven't been planning for take-up or allowing for take-up so far. Just add 1 inch per foot, or if it's easier to think of, 3 inches per yard. Go that route. It's the same thing. Start there, and then as you get into planning more projects, take lots of notes and see if that's enough. If that is going to do the trick for what you're weaving, and the materials you're using. All right, my friends, I hope that helped. I hope that gave you a little insight into the world of take-up. I hope you have a wonderful week. Happy weaving.